Long ago, before colonizers had set foot on the land we now call St. Louis, before a man named Pierre Leclerc de Guest and his assistant, Auguste Chateau, chose this land to serve as a fur trading post, before it was named after St. Louis IX of France, before it became a town, and then a bustling city, and then the proud home of the 1904 World's Fair. It was land inhabited and cared for by the Illinois or Illini Confederation. This was a group made up of 13 tribes that were located in the Mississippi River Valley. In these societies, people who were assigned male at birth sometimes lived as women and fulfilled the roles of a woman in their community. These people were called the Ekaneta and were a normal and accepted part of their societies. Long before European colonizers set foot in America, and even longer before our modern pride movements, Indigenous people recognized and continue to recognize people of different gender identities. Unlawful looks. St. Louis's anti-cross-dressing law and its effect on the queer community. Now let's fast forward to St. Louis in the 1840s. It was lively and bustling, an active port city due to its proximity to the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. St. Louis was growing rapidly at this time. In 1840, the population was around 23,000 people.
So this is before the Civil War, but St. Louis is population is going way up in the 1830s and 40s. It is a huge growing town.
Around this time, two enslaved St. Louisans named Dred and Harriet Scott decided to sue for their freedom. Although this case, 11 years later, would end up going all the way to the Supreme Court and ultimately failing, at the time it brought murmurings of an uprising of enslaved people and the hope, or for some the threat, of the end of slavery. This growing unrest, as well as the rapid population growth, caused the city to try to regain order by regulating everything they could.
Tone of the era is, wow, the city is really growing. Maybe these people, it's going to be more free people who are of color that as white political leaders, they're like, we need to keep control. We need to order this city or it's going to be chaos. So it's all kinds of things with an attempt to regulate what is a growing population. So it's everything from like, don't bathe in the river naked during daylight hours to don't literally yell and scream and bang pots and pans and disturb the peace of your neighbors.
One of these many ordinances, found in the Misdemeanors Chapter, Section 7, page 303 of the Revised Ordinances of the City of St. Louis, would affect many people in its time. It was unassuming and easy to miss, just a sentence sandwiched in a long list of misdemeanors meant to keep the city civilized. The law read in part as follows. Every person who shall appear in any street, alley, avenue, marketplace, or public square, or in any other place within the city, in a dress not belonging to their sex, shall be deemed guilty of a misdemeanor. The seemingly unremarkable law was, in fact, the first anti-cross-dressing law in the United States, and many more like it would be introduced across the United States in the following years. Laws like this had very real consequences. Of course, they kept trans people from appearing in public and painted their identities as something vulgar, comparable to being naked in public. But, starting in 1890, non-citizens arrested for cross-dressing risked being deported. This forced queer immigrants, who were already viewed by many as subhuman, to hide their identities even further. This ordinance, and all the ones subsequently based on it, violated our First Amendment right to free speech. Clothing is the way that many people express themselves, their gender identities, their style, their beliefs. Suppressing certain people from wearing certain types of clothing keeps them from expressing themselves and consequently keeps them from freely expressing their ideas. The government and the people both failed in protecting this right. The government because they didn't uphold their laws, and the people because they didn't honor their responsibility of protecting those that had less privilege than them. Now we must fast forward again to the 20th century. This was a time of great unrest for the whole world, with World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II all taking place in the first half of the century. This was also when gender inappropriateness, or cross-dressing, was gaining more attention, and beginning to be something that was looked down upon by the general public. In many places, laws that were originally meant for other things, such as laws against costumes or wearing face paint, as well as existing masquerade laws, were used to arrest queer and trans people. An example of this in St. Louis can be found in the Wahpeton Times on June 8, 1911. The newspaper clipping, titled "Gus Sieb, Girl, Throws Aside Mask," reads in part as follows. St. Louis, Missouri, June 2nd. The sound of bands and the lure of the circus parade caused Gus Sieb momentarily to throw aside her masculine stride yesterday and was arrested for masquerading as a man. She admits she is a woman and has worn men's clothes for 12 years while searching for her husband, who, she says, deserted her in Bremen, Germany. The second half of the 20th century was full of a different type of unrest, an upheaval of social norms, a revolution of marginalized people of all sorts. Black people were tired of being treated like second-class citizens. Women who had started working during World War II didn't want to go back to being homemakers. Disabled people knew they deserved equal opportunities to abled people. Free people felt the same, and in St. Louis, their dissatisfaction finally came to fruition on Halloween of 1969. Perhaps emboldened by the Stonewall riots earlier in the year, a group of 7 or 8 gay men, including a man named Greg Smith, decided to cross-dress, donning dresses and wigs for the night. They went to the Onyx Room, which was a popular gay bar at the time. Suddenly, as they walked down Olive Street, the police pulled up and arrested the group for cross-dressing, throwing them in the back of a police wagon. Smith wasn't too worried about the arrest. He didn't think he was in too much trouble, and he knew his parents would soon arrive to bail him out. However, while he waited, something big was starting to form. The Mandrake Society, a St. Louis-based LGBT group, had recently formed, and they were ready to take a stand. After hearing about the arrests, they gathered outside the police station in protest. Smith later said that it was so heartwarming to see these people there to support us. The group would later raise money to bail the rest of the men out and hire a lawyer to defend them in court. 1972 was the first time that the 1843 ordinance was challenged legally, but not much is known about the case. Goldstein Johnson was a young black person living in St. Louis, and after being arrested multiple times for cross-dressing, they decided to act. With the help of the local ACLU, or American Civil Liberties Union, Johnson appealed the law. However, before the court had made a decision about the case, Goldstein Johnson was murdered, shot in an alley after leaving a bar. We don't know much about Johnson, but we know that they are one of many queer black people that are killed because of their identity. We know that they just wanted to exist, the right to exist how they wanted to exist. And we know that if society had been honoring their responsibilities to their community, their whole community, as much as their rights, this never would have happened. This was the first strike against the law, but not the last. In the 1980s, queer and trans St. Louisans were getting fed up. Drag artists and trans people were getting arrested constantly, just for performing or wearing clothes that affirmed their gender. 2 people decided to fight back, DC, a trans woman, and MS, a drag artist. They decided to sue the city of St. Louis, saying that the anti-cross-dressing ordinance from 1843 was unconstitutional. The law, the plaintiffs said, criminalized transsexual or transgender people by making it nearly impossible for them to live as a gender other than the one they were assigned at birth for any long period of time. They also noted that it was not evenly enforced, as the police mainly used the law to target trans women and drag queens. Finally, in 1986, that law and the revised ordinance of the City of St. Louis, Chapter 15, Section 7, page 303, was ruled to be unconstitutional. This law had a large impact on many people in the time it was enforced. It was the first law banning cross-dressing in the United States, and many subsequent laws were based on this one, such as municipal laws in Denver, Colorado in 1866 and Omaha, Nebraska in 1890, as well as state laws in Texas, Oklahoma, California, and New York. This meant that it affected queer and trans people across the country, and kept them from dressing in clothes that affirm their gender, in St. Louis for more than 140 years. This shouldn't have lasted for so long. All people have a right to wear clothes that make us feel comfortable, but more than that, we have the responsibility to stand up for the people that aren't being allowed that right. DC and MS, as brave as they were, shouldn't have had to fight on their own. But luckily they did. Those 2 St. Louisans knew their rights. They knew that they had been violated, and they knew that they had a responsibility to themselves and their whole community to set things right, to bring freedom. They knew that they did nothing wrong by expressing their gender authentically, and that they didn't deserve to be judged or jailed just because of the clothes they wanted to wear. However, despite their bravery, queer and trans people's rights are still under attack in Missouri. In 2024, there were 47 anti-trans bills proposed in the state that aim to do everything from keeping educators from using trans students' correct pronouns to defining gender as a synonym for sex. More than ever, we must honor our responsibilities to the people around us, and remember that just because one person has rights doesn't mean that we all do. As Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places, close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerned citizen action to uphold them close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world."